Welcome to 20 Tactics, where you join me, James The Loremaster Lammin, for the final instalment in our 8-part series as we discuss the tactics for the 8 laws of battle magic from the core rulebook. Today, we're going to be discussing the Law of Death, and I'll begin by outlining how this video will be structured. Firstly, we'll give you an overview of the Law of Death using our competitive rating system for the laws of magic. Now, this can be found on the rating system page on triplecrownwargaming.com and is the same system we use in our deep dive videos. Now, once we've established this, we'll discuss getting the most out of the Law of Death on your wizards. Finally, we'll take a look at each of the armies which have access to Law of Death, covering maximising the Law of Magic within each of the factions. So let's begin by getting that Law of Death rating. Now, the Law of Death is a common sight in competitive Warhammer. The law is themed around sapping the life force from your enemies, and on the tabletop, it translates to a group of spells that primarily kill enemy models. Now, that's not to say that the law is a one-trick pony. It also contains some really potent hex spells as well. So, let's take a brief look at each of the 7 spells and get this law's competitive rating. Now, if you've not seen the system before, we'll give the law a score out of 24, based on the following 6 criteria. Variety of spell types, power and frequency of the law attribute, average spell range, spell flexibility, average casting value, and the quality of the signature spell. So let's begin with the law attribute, life leeching. When a Law of Death spell is resolved, roll a d6 for each unsaved wound caused by the spell. Now, models removed by the Purple Sun of Xeris each add a number of dice equal to their wounds characteristic. For each 5 or 6 rolled on these additional dice, the wizard immediately adds a dice to his army's power pool. Okay, so whilst this doesn't trigger on every spell in the lore, I don't think I need to explain why this attribute is so devastating. Purple Sun, as we'll discuss later, is one of the most powerful and infamous unit killers in Warhammer, and then after you've delivered all that damage, you get a handful of power dice back to continue the magical onslaught. I've lost count of the times this attribute has effectively given me 2 incredible magic phases in the same turn, or turned what would have otherwise been a really poor magic phase, like 3 or 4 power dice, into an excellent one. It's a top tier attribute. So let's move into our spells now, and we're going to begin with the signature spell, Spirit Leech. This is a direct damage spell, which targets a single model, even a character in a unit, is cast on a 7+, and has a range of 12 inches. Now, both the caster and the target roll a d6 and add their respective unmodified leadership value. For each point the caster wins by, the target suffers a wound with no armor saves allowed. Finally, you can boost the range of this one to 24 inches, increasing the casting value to 10+, a very modest increase in value for that huge increase in range. So it's also worth noting that the rulebook FAQ does say that you can use Inspiring Presence for this spell, which actually means it's really good on almost any level wizard as well. The obvious use is on enemy characters, attacking vital models like battle standard bearers, but where I think this spell is particularly strong is when used against single models like chariots, monsters or artillery. Now, it's worth pointing out with artillery they are treated as a single model when being targeted by spells, as these types of units often slip out of Inspiring Presence range and don't always have the greatest leadership values to begin with. It also triggers the lore attribute, so it's a great start. Moving on to the first spell proper now. Spell number 1, Aspect of the Dread Knight. Our only augment, this one has a range of 24 inches and a casting value of only 4+. The target unit causes fear until the start of the caster's next magic phase. Now, you can instead make the unit cause terror. If you do so, the casting value is increased to 9+. Look, fear isn't that great. Now, terror is a lot better, but this spell can often feel quite situational. The biggest issue for this spell, however, is that the other 6 Law of Death spells are all absolutely amazing. So if you're not Loremaster, you'll likely want to swap this one for the signature. You know, the spell's not a total write-off. It has good synergy with Doom and Darkness, but particularly if you go for the terror version of Aspect of the Dread Knight. Spell number 2 now, and that's the Caress of Lanith. Another direct damage spell with a range of 12 inches that targets a single model, even a character in a unit. It's cast on a 6+, and the target of the spell suffers a number of hits equal to 2d6 minus its strength. Now these hits successfully wound on a roll of 4+, and no armour saves may be taken against these hits. Finally, you can extend the range of this one as well to 24 inches by doubling the cast value to 12+. Another excellent character killer. This one is best employed against wizards in my opinion, as they generally have lower strength values. It's also great against artillery, as you can use the strength value of the crew, which is usually 3. All of these types of spells are especially scary against armies that rely on characters, so I'm thinking about undead in particular there. Moving on now to Soul Blight. Spell number 3 is our first of 2 hexes and is cast on a 9+. It has a range of 24 inches and the target unit suffers -1 strength and toughness to a minimum of 1 until the start of the caster's next magic phase. The wizard can choose to have the spell target all enemy units within 24 inches instead, and if you do so, the casting value is increased to 18+. This is an incredibly versatile hex, reducing enemy effectiveness in close combat, whilst at the same time increasing your unit's effectiveness in close combat, and also improving range damage as well, due to lowering toughness. It's a great spell, quite frankly, for a 9+ cast value, and it also synergises well with the previous spell, as you'll effectively get an additional hit if the target is under the effects of Soul Blight when you drop the Caress of Lanith on them, and that will apply to the Fate of Bunya, which we'll talk about later as well. The spell adds great versatility to this lore, and the boosted version, whilst having a really beefy 18+ cast value, definitely should be considered, as if you can get the wizard in the middle of your opponent's army, you've effectively got a 48-inch bubble that reduces the strength and toughness. It's incredible. It's just a shame it doesn't trigger that lore attribute as well. On to spell number 4 now, Doom and Darkness. Our second and final hex has a range of 24 inches and is cast on a 10+. The target unit suffers a -3 penalty to its leadership. Now the spell remains in play and can be boosted to increase the range to 48 inches, and the casting value goes up to 13+ if you do that. Another fantastic hex, one which has more power when you consider you can use the direct damage spells in this lore to kill enemy generals or battle standard bearers, making the impact of a leadership debuff even more potent. It has good synergy with Aspect of the Dread Knight as well, even if it's a bit situational. However, the real power of this spell is that it directly combats Stubborn and Steadfast, and is one of the only ways to weaken the power of those rules. It's also a meaningful drop as well. 3 points of leadership is a huge amount to deduct. You'll love to see it. We are motoring through, guys. We've made it to spell number 5, the Fate of Bunya. Now this is our final Death Sniper spell. Another direct damage with a range of 12 inches and a casting value of 13+. It targets a single model, which again can be a character in a unit. That model suffers a number of hits equal to 2d6 minus its toughness value. These hits successfully wound on a roll of 2+, with no armour saves allowed. Finally, if the target survives, it's subject to stupidity for the rest of the game. So you can't boost the range of this one, but the fact it wounds on a 2+ with no armour save is incredible. Now it's a bit less useful for artillery, as you use the toughness of the machine whenever you use toughness against artillery, but it's amazing against battle standard bearers, chariots and even monsters, because the 2+ to wound means although you probably won't do so many hits, you'll get a lot of wounds out of the hits you do. And don't forget, particularly with monsters again, these units often have quite poor leadership, which doesn't help them when they take that ensuing stupidity test. Which also has great synergy across the lore when you think about Doom and Darkness, where you can lower leadership further, then make them take the stupidity from this spell. This spell keeps elf characters awake at night and triggers the lore attribute as well. It's just great. So last up, spell number 6 is the infamous Purple Sun of Xeris. Everyone has a Purple Sun horror story, which should tell you how strong this spell is. Now, it's quite wordy, so I'm going to read it out from the rulebook so we don't get any of it wrong. The Purple Sun of Xeris is cast on a 15+. It remains in play. The Purple Sun is a magical vortex that uses the small round template. Once the template is placed, the player then nominates the direction in which the Purple Sun will move. To determine how many inches the template moves, roll an artillery dice and multiply the result by 3. Any model touched by the template must pass an initiative test or be slain outright, with no saves of any kind allowed. If the result of the artillery dice is a misfire, send to the template on the caster and roll a d6 and a scatter dice. The template moves the number of inches equal to the result of the d6 in the direction shown by the scatter dice. If you roll a hit, you use the small arrow on the hit symbol. In either event, in subsequent turns, the purple sun travels in a random direction and moves a number of inches equal to a roll of an artillery dice. If a misfire is rolled in subsequent turns, the sun collapses in upon itself and is removed. Now, a particularly brave wizard can infuse the purple sun with more power, and if they do so, they use the large round template instead, and the casting value is increased to 25 plus. I mean, look, this is insanely strong. As long as you get into optimised positions, the spell will literally wipe out dozens of models in a single casting attempt. Then the lore attribute offers effectively a second magic phase through the sheer volume of dice you can get back. It can be very hard to counterplay for your opponents because being a vortex passing through so many units in such a straight line, it's very hard to spread your units enough to get away from that, and I think that's probably what contributes to its fearsome reputation. One of the things that I like to point out about this spell whenever I discuss it as well is that unlike most of the other vortices in Warhammer, this one moves 3 times an artillery dice. Now most of the others move your wizard level times the dice, but this one's a fixed value, which actually is really strong because it means it's just as dangerous on a low level wizard as it is on a really high level one. Okay, so we've seen the Lore of Death is a devastating offensive lore, killing characters, debuffing enemy units, and hurling unit-slaying vortexes across the battlefield, all backed up by a terrifying lore attribute. So let's get the rating score for this lore. It gets a 4 for variety of spell types, a 3 for the power and frequency of its lore attribute, a 4 for the average spell range, a 3 for the spell flexibility, a 3 for the average casting value, and a 3 for the quality of the signature spell, giving this lore a rather impressive 20 out of 24. So let's move on to the next section of our video now, where we talk about getting the most out of the Lore of Death on your wizards. Now that lore rating shows what a powerhouse the Lore of Death is, so let's talk about the tactical tips you need to remember when using it in your games. This section is going to be divided roughly into 3. We'll cover the general tactics for using the Lore of Death, then we'll look at some specific considerations for what level wizard you have the magic on. That's maximising the lore on a level 4 or Lord Wizard, and then maximising it on a level 2 or 1 Hero Wizard. Now I want to preface this section by saying that this is in no way a one spell lore. I know there are a lot of people that talk about the Purple Sun rather than talking about the Lore of Death, and not having the Purple Sun or coming up against an enemy army that has high initiative does not make the Lore of Death useless. This lore is not a one-trick pony, and if you think that, you won't be getting the most out of it. Or if you think that and your opponent has the Lore of Death, you could find yourself getting caught out. So, general tactics. In general, there are some things that I want you guys to think about when using this lore. Firstly, you need to consider your manoeuvrability. The Lore of Death is best on a wizard with great manoeuvrability, whether that's a flying wizard or a wizard on a mount with rules like fast cavalry, as to truly get the most out of the Lore of Death, you're going to want to be able to get into tight positions. You're going to need to be out of line of sight, but close to the enemy. Now this helps you stick to the basic casting values for your spells, as you'll get in that 12-inch range more often. It also helps to ensure your Vortex will hit more models, and it gives you the best chance to maximise the boosted power of Soul Blight. Our second general tactic to consider is the use of terrain when using the Lore of Death, particularly impassable terrain. Now this ties into our previous point about manoeuvrability. Moving the Death Wizard around alone means it's important you can't be charged or easily targeted by things like magic missiles or shooting attacks. The next thing you need to remember in that scenario is that other than using the Purple Sun, you don't actually require line of sight to cast any of the other spells from the Lore of Death. So if you're not looking to drop the Vortex, why can your enemy see you? Getting behind something that blocks line of sight just keeps you safe and won't affect your output or effectiveness. So be on the lookout for the option to do this on the tabletop. Now the final part of our general tactics section is to consider including a support caster or two in your army when using the Law of Death. The one thing that the Law of Death is really missing is a basic magic missile for things like chaff clearance. So I'd always try to include another spellcaster or two with access to this type of spell. The second reason to do that, of course, is your Law attribute. If you only have one wizard with the Law of Death, you can often find that once you've generated all those additional power dice from life leeching, you don't have enough spells left to cast to use them up. You're effectively wasting part of that attribute. With another wizard in your list, however, they can use up all those life leeching dice to improve your magical output even further. Okay, so we're now going to take a look at the different tactics for using a Lord level wizard with the Law of Death and a Hero level wizard, or that level 4/level 2. Now, with the Lord level or level 4 wizard on the Law of Death, it is quite difficult to go wrong. Against most armies, you'll want to prioritise the Purple Sun of Xeris. Now this will help to ensure that the points you invest in this wizard delivers the most devastating effect and also generates the most additional power dice to ensure you have the dice to cast spells with your other wizards or to cast the remaining 3 spells on your Law of Death level 4. The only time I wouldn't do this is against probably elf armies, in which case I'd prioritise both of the hexes first and foremost, Soulblight and Doom and Darkness. Demolishing the leadership value of high-cost elite units to break them or panic them is amazing, and Soulblight makes those pesky elves a pitiful toughness 2, meaning they're susceptible to, well, a stiff breeze. I've seen some people have real success in the past as well, with a blaster-type Death Wizard or a Death Sniper character. That's a character that's gone for Spirit Leech, Caress of Lanif and Fate of Bunya as their sort of first-choice spells. Although, I have to say, I think you're only going to get the most out of that against armies that have lots of good value single model targets, lots of chariots, lots of characters, etc. So just be aware that that's an option, and the Death Sniper type level 4 is still very scary. So let's move on now to consider hero level wizards. And I generally like to stick to level 1s on my Death Wizards for heroes. Now, there's nothing wrong with a level 2 on the Law of Death, and I have used that in the past, because the casting values aren't too high. So you can get even some of the sort of even spell 3 and 4 and 5 off with a level 2 quite easily. But I like level 1s because that means I'll just stick to the very flexible signature spell. If you keep that hero wizard within Inspiring Presence of your general, you'll find Spirit Leech becomes, well, the nemesis of a lot of enemy characters. Chariots, monsters, artillery pieces, thanks to the fact that you can boost its range to 24 inches. And then what you get is a character in that level 1 that's really low cost, that's having a really annoying nuisance effect on the enemy, which is ideal. It's just a way of maximising the points you spend. And don't forget that you can still cast a lot of the spells from this law whilst you're in combat, providing you have Arc of Sight and the target's unengaged. So, the Law of Death and the armies. I'm going to move on to our final section now, and I'm going to take a look at the tactics for the Law of Death with respect to the specific armies that can take it. I'll take a brief look at each of the armies with overall things I want you to remember when using the Law of Death with them. These are, in effect, practical pointers for a lot of the tactics we've already discussed. High Elves. The Law of Death has a lot of potential for High Elf players, as the army has the ability to stick to the general tactics we outlined above. Now, it is fair to say that the law doesn't offer the most obvious tactical synergy with the common High Elf builds. However, a level 4 with the Law of Death can be devastating if employed as part of a list that I like to call the Frostheart Attack Wing. So you take your level 4 wizard and pop him on the Law of Death, giving him the Book of Hoeth, Talisman of Preservation, and mounting him on a Great Eagle. Now that obviously allows you to fulfill the general tactics we discussed above, certainly principles 1 and 2. Combine this with Caradhrian on Ashtari, 2 Frostheart Phoenixes, a level 2 wizard on a horse, probably with high magic, pop that level 2 into some Dragon Princes of Kelador, and what you've done is created a really mobile list with 3 Terror Causing flyers and useful support magic. Aim for both Soulblight and Doom and Darkness as the most important spells, as they synergise so well with the Frostheart's Terror and the Frostheart's reduction in enemy strength values, and look for that Purple Sun to help break down those really large, tough enemy units. If you don't want to go sort of all out on something this extreme, then simply putting a level 1 wizard on the Law of Death into your standard high elf build can be great too. Just stick to the general tactics we discussed for hero wizards earlier. Dark Elves. Dark Elves are seen by many as the undisputed kings, or rather queens, of death magic. Morathai, the best special character in their book, and one of the best special characters in Warhammer I might add, has access to the law, and she is quite frankly a staple of Dark Elf armies. Realistically, if you're looking at the Law of Death on your Dark Elves, you should be taking her. She's a level 4 wizard on the law, with an additional plus D3 to all of her casting attempts, meaning she can drop a purple sun on a good day on as little as 8 on her power dice. As she comes on a Pegasus, she allows you to stick to the general tactics we talked about earlier, and she's really hard to shift. She has a 4+ ward save, which is improved to 2+ against spells thanks to her magic resistance. Dark Elves also have access to, and competitively will want to take, Doomfire Warlocks. These guys are level 2 wizards who always know Doombolt from Dark Magic and Soulblight from the Law of Death. This combination not only means that any dice you gain from life leeching will never go to waste, but also gives you the incredible ability to stack Soulblights. Now, no other army can do that. You can get 3 into your list if you take it on Morathai, or you could choose to leave it off of her, knowing that you've got it twice on your 2 units of Doomfire Warlocks, which allows her to take 4 of the other spells from the lore and effectively keep access to that one. The synergy with Doombolt is obvious as well, dropping toughness with Soulblight and leadership with Doom and Darkness to unleash more wounds from the Doombolt and make the opponent more likely to fail the ensuing panic tests. This all drops in with the usual suspects of Bolt Throwers, Executioners, Dark Riders and Witches, all of which hold their own with minimal magical buffs, which makes taking death even better, as you can focus on grabbing some of those sniper spells to ensure that Morathai gets some juicy character kills too. And we haven't even talked about the Purple Sun, which is obviously another fantastic choice. It's hard to pick the wrong spells, to be honest. My advice to Dark Elf Generals is, take the Purple Sun if the initiative is low, take Doom and Darkness if affecting leadership is really worthwhile. Wood Elves. Many of you will know I think the Law of Death is fantastic on Wood Elves. Putting a level 4 wizard onto an elven steed in a Wood Elf army makes them fast cavalry, allowing them to deliver on the general tactics of the Law of Death with ease. Like their Dark Cousins, the Wood Elves can combine this law with Dark Magic too. However, this will have to be done with another level 4 wizard, something which not only can be done pretty easily by Wood Elves, but in fact is actually very competitive. I'd take that second level 4 also on an elven steed, and if you've seen me use it in the battle reports on the channel, you'll know I would then place them in a unit of Sisters of the Thorn. Get some magic resistance in there and you have one of the most mobile death bunkers in the game. Purple Sun is very often the prime spell for your Wood Elves, as they do struggle to get to grips with large blocks, and in this build it's even better as the life leeching means the second level 4 can deliver an onslaught of magic missiles, powerful debuffs and more conventional direct damage, all of which complements the strengths of the Law of Death. This bunker can win games alone, and will drop into most conventional shooting heavy builds with ease, which further benefit from Soulblight and Doom and Darkness to create more chances to cause panic with all that shooting. Purple Sun and the 2 hexes are likely to be your first choices, although as the Law of Death is so reactive, you may look in some games to leave one of the hexes at home to get the most out of your manoeuvrability and take 2 death sniper spells, Spirit Leech, Fate of Bunya. They're probably the best 2 in this build. The Empire. I'm going to start by saying that whilst the Law of Death is great, it doesn't have the most obvious synergy with the Empire. If you're looking to go down the Law of Death route with your humans, I'd start by dropping a Battle Wizard Lord onto a Pegasus and taking the Talisman of Preservation. Empire don't have great basic stats, and so if you're taking the Law of Death as your main caster, you'll want to look at how you can get other buff choices into your list to ensure that the Death Magic's damage doesn't come at too high a price for your battle line regiments. I'd combine the Death Wizard Lord with some Warrior Priests, a Celestial Hurricanum, a Luminarch of Hysh, and some Battle Wizard heroes, probably on the Law of Beasts. Now this gives your wizard additional power and dispel dice from the wagons, but crucially, the buffs to keep your Empire units really fighting hard. They'll still have Hatred, +1 to hit, a 6+ ward save, and potentially additional strength and toughness from the Law of Beast support casters, to fall back on whilst your Death Wizard is doing his damage. Now those units I've just mentioned are in there for a further reason, and that's that they themselves all have plenty of spells, the majority of which are bound, which is an ideal use for the dice you get from life leeching. In this case, you're definitely looking for Purple Sun as your prime choice, and you'll likely want Soul Blight and then probably 2 Death Sniper spells to give yourself the best chance of getting the most out of this wizard. Lizardmen. The robust stat lines of Lizardmen battle line units means that whilst the Law of Death is not the most obvious choice, it can actually be pretty good, giving the raw damage the army sometimes feels a little short of. If you decide to go down the Death Frog route, you may be tempted to look at a Ghost Slan. That's a Slan Mage Priest with a higher state of consciousness, moving around the table solo to try and deliver the first 2 tactical pointers I gave in the general tactics section. However, I would caution against this. To get the manoeuvrability requirement for maximising the Law of Death in a Lizardman army, I'd use the Arcane Vassal rule, which allows you to cast direct damage Law of Death spells through your Skink Priests. Then take 2 Skink Priests, give one of them the Cloak of Feathers and the other one, predictably, the Arabian Carpet. Now this gives you 2 flying models on 20mm bases that can get into those dangerous positions to deliver the raw damage of the Law of Death. Those priests can also act as an outlet for the power dice you gain from the life leeching lore attribute as well. I'd definitely make sure I included at least 1 Bastillodon with Solar Engine 2. This will give me a really good quality magic missile and will ensure that my magic damage is much more rounded. My final Lizardman point would be that I want you to be very careful about the direction you fire Purple Sun in if you choose to take it. You do not want your Lizardmen blocks being hit by a stray one, as your initiative is poor. Now, as a touchback point to me recommending the Bastillodon with a solar engine, another reason to do that is that he does up the initiative of your troops and gives you a better chance of passing the Purple Sun if a stray one ends up where you don't want it. Beastmen. The Children of Chaos are usually more well known for using the laws of Shadow or Beasts in a competitive setting. Now, whilst these laws do offer more obvious and powerful synergy to your Beastmen armies, I'd argue you should always have at least 1 hero level wizard on the Law of Death in your competitive games, and that wizard is Slugtongue. Now check out the Beastman deep dive to see why Slugtongue is so good, but if you're including him, I'd be using the Law of Death on him. The ideal spell for Beastman, outside of the obvious powerhouse that is Purple Sun, would be to aim for Soul Blight. Now, this spell works so well with Beastman because you'll likely have Withering and Enfeebling Foe from the Law of Shadow, or Wiston's Wildform from the Law of Beasts. And your units actually start with pretty good toughness values, so it helps to maximise them as well. The lower cast value of Soul Blight also works really nicely on that lower level wizard, so it's another reason why I think that should be your top priority spell. I definitely think for me on a Beastman army, the hero level wizard is the way to go with the Law of Death, and just gives you another outlet for your magic, and it gives you the option to access some of Death's devastating power. Demons of Chaos. Sticking with Chaos now, we're moving on to Demons. Now, Demons of Nurgle can take the Law of Death, so that means either using a Demon Prince of Nurgle or a Great Unclean One to access a Lord level wizard on the Law of Death. Now, these aren't the most competitive options for Demons armies. However, if you do decide to go down that route, your key spell for me will be Soul Blight again. Reducing enemy strength and toughness has fantastic synergy with Demons of Nurgle, as it makes the most of their prestigious toughness values. It also helps them do more wounds because their strength is pretty average outside of Epidemus' tally. Personally, if I was looking for the raw devastation from the Law of Death in my Demons army, I'd be taking Kairos Fateweaver. Kairos can choose up to 4 spells from the Law of Death. That's right, he picks the spells. This allows you to always have the best options, taking Caress of Lanith, Spirit Leech and Fate of Bunya for a raw character killer, or perhaps opting instead for Doom and Darkness to make the most out of the fear and terror across your army, or just taking that Purple Sun for raw output. That's also customisable at the start of the game. Terrifyingly good. Even better, Kairos flies and can take 4 other spells from across the 7 other Laws of Battle Magic. That's a sentence. Plus, he knows all of the Law of Zinj, meaning in effect he's also his own support caster as well. This means that Kairos allows you to deliver on every point of general tactics for the Law of Death, all on his own. He's a powerhouse. Warriors of Chaos. Unmarked and Mark of Nurgle sorcerers have access to the Lore of Death, and the Flying Nurgle Demon Prince with the Lore of Death is a staple of competitive Warhammer. Unsurprisingly, this model finds it easy to deliver on all of the general Lore of Death tactics we've already covered. Taking the Chaos Familiar gives the Demon Prince 5 spells from the lore, and I'd argue that is the most important part of the build from a spellcasting point of view. Now that's because for Warriors of Chaos armies, spells like Spirit Leech, Fate of Bunya and the Caress of Lenith take on a whole new competitive application, preventing challenges. Warriors characters or champions, excluding the Demon Prince, have to issue and accept challenges, and these spells give you a chance to ensure that a pesky unit champion doesn't stop your mighty exalted hero from cutting a bloody swathe through enemy ranks. You'll definitely want to have a couple of those on your Demon Prince, but not at the expense of the Purple Sun or the Hexes, which also have incredible synergy with Warriors of Chaos armies, and this is why I said that Chaos Familiar is so useful. Purple Sun is so good as, being an elite army, this really levels the playing field against massed enemies, while Soulblight helps to make the most out of your infantry's impressive stat line. Doom and Darkness has fantastic synergy with both the Demon Prince's Terror and a lot of the other competitive staple choices like Chimeras and Hell Cannons for the same reason. For your Nurgle Demon Prince, just swap Aspect to the Dread Knight for the signature and you'll probably have 5 really great spells. Chaos Dwarves, Legion of Asgore. Our final Chaos faction now, and if you're looking to take the Lore of Death on these guys, then you'll want to mount your Sorcerer Prophet onto a Bowed Taurus. Now I know it's getting repetitive, but we've got to hit the general tactics. Those are really important in maximising this lore. Purple Sun can be a bit of a risk for your Legion of Asgore armies, as you don't have great initiative values, so you do need to consider again, like we talked about with the Lizardmen, the angle that spell's going at. For me, Chaos Dwarves get their biggest wins from Soulblight and Doom and Darkness, and the Death Sniper spells, particularly Spirit Leech. So let me explain why I feel that way. Soulblight and Doom and Darkness mean your artillery is way more dangerous and more likely to panic key enemy units off of the table. The Doom and Darkness also synergises well with the terror of both your Bowed Taurus and Kadai Destroyer, both of which also see fantastic benefits from the sniper spells as well. Now this is because non-magical attacks must reroll successful wounds against both the Bowed Taurus and the Kadai. Now for most armies, their magical attacks are going to be on their characters, so killing them before your monsters make it into combat will really help get the most out of them. Spirit Leech is particularly potent in this regard, as your wizard is leadership 10 if you go for the Lord choice. So if you go for that level 4, I'd hit both the hexes as my main priority, and I'd probably always include the signature. I do think though that a level 1 or 2 on death can be really strong for your Legion of Asgore army, using the inspiring presence of your general to keep your leadership high and freeing your wizard lord up to take the Lore of Hashut. Either way, the priority spells probably still remain the same. Ogre Kingdoms. The Lore of Death is rarely seen on Ogre Kingdoms armies, and I think this is due to Ogre players looking for more buffs from their magic, and the fact that you have to take a wizard on the Lore of the Great Maw. Now that said, I think that the Slaughtermaster's impressive survivability could lend itself to a really potent Lore of Death mage. Taking, say, the Arabian Carpet, the Talisman of Preservation and the Charmed Shield makes a 5 wound, toughness 5 character that has real manoeuvrability. That hits all of the core tactics for the Lore of Death, and he'll actually stick around whilst doing it. If you go down this route, my army would definitely include Lead Belchers, and plenty of them. These guys really make the most out of Soulblight and Doom and Darkness at range, which incidentally would be the first 2 spells I looked for. Ogres Cause Fear, which whilst isn't great, is improved on them because they're weapon skill 3. So when that Doom and Darkness comes in and helps to make your opponent foul them more often, your ogres are suddenly hitting on 3s and your enemies hitting you back on 5s. You drop a Soulblight into that mix and improve your toughness with, say, the spell from the Lore of the Maw, and suddenly you've got some seriously tough ogre units to hit and wound. That makes them hard to get rid of. The other 2 spells on your level 4 Death Wizard should be much more matchup dependent, focusing on the sniper spells for characters or individual model heavy armies, and aiming at the Purple Sun for low initiative big number armies. If you do go for the latter, just remember you've got to think about the direction it goes in, because you haven't got the world's best initiative, guys. Tomb Kings. Moving on to Tomb Kings now, and for me these guys have a very fractious relationship with the Lore of Death. With items like the Cloak of Dunes, it can appear easy to create a Death Wizard for the Tomb Kings that hits the core tactics. However, their inability to march massively curtails the Lore's power. They do, however, have a special character who comes with the Lore of Death, Arcan the Black. Now, Arcan is a level 5 wizard and can be a Hierophant even though he uses death magic. I know he's popular with some players, and I've seen him utilised on foot and on his flying chariot over the years. For me, I think he's pretty good if you drop him in on foot in a large unit of Tomb Guard. My first choice spell would again be Soul Blight if I'm honest, and probably followed very swiftly by Doom and Darkness, as Tomb Guard are strength and toughness 4 and Arcan is toughness 5, so the first of those two gives really great extra combat defence. There's also really strong synergy with Soul Blight and banks of archers as well. Now to go on to the second spell I mentioned, Doom and Darkness, this is fantastic for Tomb King armies because they have access to a lot of terror causing units. They have army-wide fear, and they have 2 units that really get tons out of this spell. That's the Casket of Souls and the Screaming Skull Catapult. The Casket makes enemy units take wounds based on leadership tests, improved obviously by Doom and Darkness, and the Catapult causes a panic test if a unit takes just 1 casualty from it. Again, more effective when you apply the Doom and Darkness. Purple Sun remains a fantastic unit killer as always, it just tends to find its use a lot later in the game. For my final sort of spells on Arcan to make up the 5, I'd definitely want to get the signature spell, and I'd probably look for Cressel and Nif in a perfect set, as both can have their range boosted to 24 inches, a massive help for an army that's very slow. Vampire Counts. Our final faction in this monumental video, the Vampire Counts can really exploit the Lore of Death. I've had a lot of success with a hero level Death Wizard on a Hellsteed. However, if you really want to go for the Lore of Death, then you should be looking at Count Manfred von Carstein. He's a Loremaster for the lore. He can go on foot, on a horse, a Hellsteed, or an Abyssal Terror. All the choices. Now, the Hellsteed is my preferred option, as he retains the cavalry unit type, allowing him to join units like Black Knights and still benefit from a Lookout Sir there. And he also gets the Fly special rule for shooting off around the table. Now, there's no need to worry about preferred spells, as you've got the lot. So instead, I'm going to point out the obvious and powerful combinations available when you've got Manfred in tow. Doom and Darkness is probably at its best in a Vampire Counts army, due to the Death Shriek ability of your Terrorgeists. You roll 2d6 and add the Terrorgeist's remaining wounds, then subtract the target's leadership. The difference is the number of wounds they take with no armour saves allowed. This is even more ridiculous when you factor in Doom and Darkness. In addition, the army has easy access to Terror, with every slot except Core having Terror-causing units in it. Soul Blight has fantastic synergy too, particularly on the bubbled up version with multiple units of Hex Wraiths, and tough regiments like Crypt Horrors really benefit from it too. My final tactic here involves using the Purple Sun. Zombies are initiative 1, so on a turn with low power dice, don't be afraid to drop a Purple Sun towards an enemy unit that accidentally hits a lot of your own zombies, who then act as a power dice battery to generate a huge magic phase. Then you just get them all back with your Lore of Vampires magic, which Manfred is also a Loremaster of. You'll love to see it, ladies and gentlemen. That's it, we've made it to the end of this huge video. So to conclude, I'm sure you can see why the Lore of Death is such a powerful and competitive lore, and how you can use this impressive 20 out of 24 powerhouse in your games of Warhammer for maximum effect. As ever, please feel free to get in touch with us through our social media or comment on the videos with your thoughts about the Lore of Death, and head back to the Night of the Realm mustering ground to check out all of our other exclusive content. I'll see you next time on 20 Tactics.
Remember to tag your friends and like, subscribe and share. Then head over to triplecrownwargaming.com and become a Knight of the Realm today.
What are you doing, mate?
You alright? Do it for Warhammer!